I was 12 the day I learned that some people are allowed to need things, and some people aren't. The bus lurched sideways on the icy mountain road, and I remember thinking how strange it was that everything moved in slow motion except my heart. The screaming started before the metal even began to crumble. I was pressed against the window, watching the guardrail bend like paper, and my phone was already in my hand because some part of me knew, some small animal part, that I needed help that wouldn't come. I called home first. 3 rings, then 4. My mother's voice, irritated. "Helena, I'm at Emma's recital rehearsal. What is it?" Behind her, I could hear the piano, those careful scales my sister played with such delicate precision. I opened my mouth to speak, but the bus tilted further, and someone's backpack hit my face. "Mom," I managed. "The bus..." But she'd already cut me off. "Whatever it is, handle it yourself. Emma needs me right now. She's nervous." The line went dead. The bus was still sliding. I could smell burning rubber and the sharp tang of fierce sweat from the 30 other students pressed against each other like dominoes waiting to fall. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone, but I tried again. This time I called my father. He answered on the 6th ring, breathless. "Helena, I'm in a meeting. This better be important." Through the phone, I could hear voices, laughter, the clink of glasses. One of his business dinners. "Dad, please, the bus is crashing." His sigh was heavy, theatrical. "Helena, you're always so dramatic. If something was actually wrong, the school would call us. Stop interrupting important things with your need for attention." He hung up. I tried one more time. I called David, my boyfriend of 8 months, the boy who'd promised he'd always be there. The boy who'd held my hand at the school fair and told me I was the only person who understood him. He answered with music thumping in the background. "Babe, can this wait? I'm at Ryan's party and..." "David, please, I need..." "Look, you're always needing something. Emma never calls her boyfriend constantly. She gives him space. Maybe try being more like her?" The words hit harder than the impact I knew was coming. "But we'll talk later. I need to go." The bus hit the embankment at an angle that made the metal scream. I watched my phone slip from my fingers and skitter down the aisle as we rolled. Once. Twice. Everything became a confusion of broken glass and overturned seats, and the sound of children crying for parents who would actually answer. I ended up pinned beneath a seat, staring at a crack in the ceiling that looked like a river branching into smaller streams. My ribs felt wrong. My breathing sounded wet. A teacher's voice, distant and panicked. "Stay calm! Help is coming!" But I already knew help wasn't coming for me. Not the kind that mattered. Not the kind that showed up when you called it by name. I thought about Emma then. Perfect Emma with her piano competitions and her gentle smile and her way of needing things that always seemed reasonable, never desperate. When Emma called, people answered. When Emma needed, people gave. She was the kind of girl who could ask for help without seeming weak, who could be vulnerable without being a burden. I was the other kind. The kind whose needs were too loud, too frequent, too inconvenient. The cold came slowly, seeping up from the ground through the broken floor of the bus. I stopped trying to move. My phone was somewhere in the wreckage, but it didn't matter anymore. No one was going to call back. No one was coming. The realization didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. It felt almost peaceful, like finally understanding, or a rule everyone else had known all along. I closed my eyes and let the cold take me. The last thing I heard was the piano from my mother's phone call, still echoing in my memory. Emma's scales, perfect and precise, the sound of a daughter worth answering for. I woke up to sunlight streaming through my bedroom window, warm and golden and impossible. My body jerked upright, hands flying to my ribs, expecting pain that wasn't there. The room spun into focus slowly. My desk covered in textbooks, the poster of the solar system on my wall, my backpack hanging on the door hook. everything exactly as it had been. My phone said it was Monday morning, 3 months before the accident, 3 months before I died on a school bus while my family listened to piano scales. I sat very still, letting the truth settle into my bones like sediment. This wasn't a dream. Dreams didn't have this weight, this clarity. I remembered everything: the crash, the cold, the sound of my own breath slowing down. I remembered dying alone while the people I loved chose other things over my voice asking for help. But I also remembered something else. I remembered the pattern. How many times had I called them before that final day? How many small emergencies had I created? How many moments had I demanded they drop everything because I needed validation that I mattered? I'd called my mother 17 times the month before the accident. Most of those calls had been about nothing. A bad grade I was worried about, a friend who'd said something mean, the feeling that I wasn't good enough. I'd called my father during his meetings, during his dinners, during his quiet weekend mornings. I'd texted David during his basketball practice, his family dinners, his rare moments of peace. I'd trained them all to ignore me. I'd cried wolf so many times that when the wolf actually came, they'd learned not to listen. The realization didn't make me angry. It made me calm, clear. I'd spent my first life demanding to be seen, to be chosen, to be put first. And in doing so, I'd made myself invisible. This time would be different. This time I would learn to carry my own weight. This time I would save my voice for moments that mattered, and in the silence between, I would build something they couldn't ignore, my own strength. I got dressed without calling down for my mother to help me choose an outfit. I made my own breakfast without asking my father if the toast was too dark. I walked to school without texting David every thought that crossed my mind. The silence felt strange at first, like wearing new shoes that hadn't been broken in yet. But with each hour that passed, it felt more like power. At lunch, Emma found me in the library instead of the cafeteria. "Hey," she said softly, sliding into the chair across from me. "You okay? You've been quiet today." She looked genuinely concerned, my perfect sister with her careful eyes and her natural grace. In my first life, I'd resented her so deeply I could taste it. Now I just saw her clearly, a girl who'd learned early how to need things in ways that people could handle, while I'd never learned at all. "I'm fine," I said, just thinking. "About what?" I looked at her for a long moment. "About how much energy I've been wasting." She tilted her head, puzzled, but didn't push. That was Emma's gift, knowing when to lean in and when to step back. I'd never learned it because I'd never had to. I'd always been loud enough that people had to respond, even when they didn't want to. The weeks passed like water finding a new course. I stopped calling my mother during Emma's activities. I stopped interrupting my father's work. I stopped filling David's phone with messages about every small anxiety that crossed my mind. At first, they didn't notice. Then they noticed in a way that felt like relief. Their phones quieter, their days less interrupted, their youngest daughter finally maturing. But I was doing something else too. I was building. I joined the school's emergency response club, learning first aid and crisis management. I started studying harder, not for validation, but for competence. I opened a savings account with money from a part-time job at the library and watched the numbers grow. Every skill I learned, every dollar I saved, every moment I chose self-reliance over dependency, it all became armor. 2 months into my second life, my mother commented on it at dinner. "You've been so independent lately, Helena. It's wonderful to see you growing up." She smiled at me with pride that felt hollow because I knew what it really meant. I'd finally become less work for her. "Thank you," I said evenly. I didn't tell her that independence wasn't something I'd chosen. It was something I'd learned after calling for help and hearing only silence. My father nodded, cutting into his steak with satisfaction. "It's a relief, honestly. You were going through that phase where you needed constant reassurance about everything. I'm glad you've outgrown it." He said it like it was a compliment, like my silence was maturity rather than resignation. I watched him chew and swallow and reach for his wine, completely unaware that what he was praising was the death of my faith in him. Emma was quieter, watching me across the table with eyes that saw more than our parents did. She'd always been perceptive, my sister. She could read a room the way she read sheet music, understanding the spaces between notes, the rests that gave rhythm meaning. "Are you happy, Helena?" she asked suddenly. The question caught our parents off guard. My mother looked up from her plate, confused. "Of course she's happy. Look how well she's doing." But Emma kept her eyes on me, waiting for the real answer. "I'm learning," I said carefully, "to be enough for myself." Something flickered across Emma's face. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. She was the golden child, but she wasn't blind. She knew what our family was, what it demanded, what it rewarded. She'd just been better at playing the game than I had. The accident date approached like a storm on the horizon. I knew the exact day, the exact time, the exact moment when the bus would hit that patch of ice on the mountain road. 3 days before, I went to the school administration and reported a mechanical issue I'd noticed with bus 47. They thanked me for my diligence and sent the bus for inspection. They found a brake line that was nearly severed, nothing to do with ice, everything to do with negligence that would have killed us anyway. Bus 47 was taken out of service. Our route was reassigned. The day came and went. No crash, no emergency, no moment of truth where I learned whether they'd answer this time. I sat in my bedroom that evening, listening to Emma practice piano downstairs, and felt something close to peace. I'd changed fate not by making them love me better, but by making myself need them less. But I also felt something else, a hollowness where certainty used to live. In my first life, I'd been so sure of my place in their hearts, even as they disappointed me. Now I had no idea where I stood. The silence I'd built was protection, but it was also isolation. I'd saved myself from the pain of being ignored, but I'd also cut myself off from the possibility of being seen. Life has a way of testing lessons we think we've learned. It happened 4 months after my rebirth. On a Saturday afternoon in late spring, Emma was at a piano competition, the regional final she'd worked toward for years. My parents had taken the day off work, dressed in their best clothes, and driven 3 hours to watch her perform. David was at a baseball tournament, chasing the scholarship he needed for college. I was home alone, studying for finals in the quiet house. The first sign of trouble was the smell, acrid and sharp like burning plastic. I followed it downstairs to the kitchen, where smoke was beginning to seep from the walls near the old electrical outlet my father had been meaning to replace for months. The smoke detector hadn't gone off. Its battery had died weeks ago. Another item on the endless list of repairs that never seemed urgent until they were. I stood very still, watching the smoke thicken. In my first life, I would have panicked. I would have called my mother, my father, David, anyone who might rescue me from the responsibility of handling it alone. I would have made it their emergency, their burden, their crisis to solve while I fell apart. Instead, I walked calmly to the kitchen, shut off the main electrical breaker, grabbed the fire extinguisher from under the sink, and put out the small flames that had started to lick up the wall. Then, I called the fire department, gave them the address and a clear description of the situation, and waited outside on the lawn while they came to assess the damage. They arrived within 7 minutes. Professionals who didn't need to love me to help me, who responded to necessity rather than obligation. They praised my quick thinking, checked the house thoroughly, and confirmed that I'd prevented what could have been a serious fire. They left me with a list of repairs and a reminder to replace smoke detector batteries. I sat on the lawn afterward, grass cool beneath my hands, and realised I hadn't thought to call my family even once. Not because I was punishing them, but because it genuinely hadn't occurred to me. I'd handled it. The emergency was over. There was nothing they needed to rescue me from because I'd already rescued myself. But then, I looked at my phone and saw 3 missed calls from my mother. She'd been calling during the crisis, probably during Emma's performance, and I hadn't answered because I'd been too busy putting out actual fires. I stared at the notifications, feeling something twist in my chest. She'd called, and I hadn't answered. The symmetry was almost poetic. I called her back. She answered on the first ring, breathless. "Helena, thank God. I was getting worried. You never don't answer." The statement hung in the air between us, heavy with irony she didn't even hear. "I'm fine," I said. "There was a small electrical fire. I put it out. Fire department came and checked everything." The silence on her end was long and strange. "A fire? You handled a fire by yourself?" "Yes." "Why didn't you call us?" I almost laughed. "You were 3 hours away watching Emma perform. What could you have done?" "We could have..." She stopped. I could hear her breathing, could almost see her face as she realised what she was about to say. We could have worried. We could have felt helpless. We could have experienced the same useless panic I'd felt on that bus while she listened to piano scales and told me to handle it myself. "I should have called you anyway," I said, and meant it. Not because I'd needed her to fix it, but because she deserved to know her daughter was in danger. That was the difference I was still learning, between needing someone to save you and choosing to let them care. But I also sent a text to the family group chat, just to make it official. "Small electrical fire, kitchen, fire department came, everything's fine. House needs some repairs before you get home." The responses came in a flood. My mother, "What? Are you okay? We're leaving now." My father, "Emma's performance isn't over, but we're coming home." Emma, "Helena? Please tell me you're not hurt." David, separately, "Just saw your mum's post on Facebook. You okay? Why didn't you tell me?" I stared at the messages, watching them multiply, and felt something twist in my chest. They were worried. They wanted to help. They were ready to drop everything and come home. All the things they hadn't been the day I died. But this time, I hadn't needed them to be. This time, I'd been enough on my own. I typed back carefully. "I'm completely fine. No injuries. Handled it properly. Fire department said I did everything right. Please don't leave Emma's competition. She's worked too hard for this. The house will still be here when you get back tonight." My mother called anyway. "Helena, sweetheart, are you absolutely sure you're okay?" Her voice was tight with an anxiety I'd spent my first life craving and my second life learning to live without. "I'm fine, Mum. Really, it wasn't a big fire. I caught it early." "You should have called us immediately. Before the fire department. Before anything." The irony sat on my tongue like poison, but I swallowed it down. "You were 3 hours away watching Emma perform. What could you have done that I didn't do?" The silence on the other end was long and complicated. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. I'm your mother. I should be there when you need me." "You are there when I need you," I said, and it was almost true. "But I didn't need you today. I needed the fire department and I called them. That's what handling emergencies means." She made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh. "When did you get so grown up?" 3 months ago, I said quietly, when I stopped asking you to carry things I could carry myself. I could hear her crying then, soft and broken. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for every time I made you feel like needing me was a burden, for every time I chose something else over your voice. I'm so sorry, baby." The apology came too late and too early all at once. Too late for the girl who'd died on a bus, too early for the woman I was still becoming. I didn't know what to do with it, so I just let it sit there between us, awkward and necessary. "Come home when Emma's done," I said. "I'll have dinner started." They came home that evening anyway, even though Emma's competition wasn't quite finished. She took second place instead of first because she'd been distracted during her final piece, worried about her sister instead of focused on her performance. My mother hugged me too tightly in the driveway, and my father kept touching my shoulder as if checking I was solid and real. David showed up an hour later, still in his baseball uniform, with flowers he'd, clearly guess who dates, grabbed from a gas station. "I should have been here," he kept saying. I should have answered faster. I should have. "You were exactly where you needed to be," I told him. I was fine. But something had shifted in his eyes. Something that looked like guilt, like recognition, like the slow dawning of a pattern he'd never noticed before. "You never call me anymore," he said. "Not like you used to. I thought you'd gotten over being so needy. But maybe you just stopped believing I'd answer." The truth of it hung between us like smoke. I could have lied, could have soothed his ego, could have made it easier for him. Instead, I just shrugged. Maybe both things are true. He left an hour later, and I could see in the set of his shoulders that something between us had broken. Not dramatically, not with anger or tears, but with the quiet certainty that comes when you realize someone has outgrown needing you. Emma was quieter than usual that evening. She sat on the couch with her second-place trophy in her lap, turning it over and over in her hands. "I'm sorry," I told her. "About the competition. You should have won." She looked up at me with eyes that were older than they'd been that morning. I couldn't focus. All I could think about was you in a burning house, handling it alone because you don't trust us anymore to show up when it matters. "Emma, no. Let me say this." She set the trophy down carefully. "You've changed, Helena, and part of it is good. You're stronger, more capable, more sure of yourself. But part of it scares me. It's like you've built this wall and you're so safe behind it that no one can reach you anymore, not even when you're actually in danger." I sat down beside her, feeling the truth of her words settle into my bones. I didn't know how else to survive. Survive what? I almost told her then. About the bus, about the cold, about dying while everyone I loved was too busy to answer, but the words wouldn't come. How do you explain to someone that you've already lived through their failure to save you? Survive feeling like I was too much, I said instead, like my needs were this burden everyone had to carry. So I learned to carry them myself. Emma's hand found mine. "You were too much sometimes. I'm not going to lie about that. You called constantly. You made everything a crisis. You needed reassurance about things you should have been able to figure out yourself. It was exhausting to be around." The honesty hurt, but it was clean, better than platitudes. "But," she continued, squeezing my fingers, "that doesn't mean you deserve to be ignored when something real was happening. And it doesn't mean you have to go through everything alone now just to prove you're not that person anymore." I leaned my head on her shoulder, and she wrapped her arm around me, and we sat there in the quiet like we used to when we were small. Before I'd become too needy and she'd become too perfect. Before we'd learned to perform our roles so well that we'd forgotten how to just be sisters. The real test came 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday that started ordinary and ended in ways I never could have predicted. I was in the school library during lunch, working on a college scholarship application, when Emma appeared beside my table. Her face was wrong, too pale, too tight, her breath coming in short gasps. "Helena," she whispered, and her voice shook. "Something's wrong. I think I'm having a heart attack." My first instinct was to assume she was being dramatic. Emma didn't do medical emergencies. Emma did piano recitals and perfect grades and carefully managed anxiety that never spilled over into crisis. But her hand was pressed to her chest, and her lips had a faint blue tinge, and I knew with the same certainty I'd known about the bus crash that this was real. I didn't hesitate. I called 911 first. Clear, calm, precise information about our location and her symptoms. Then I called my mother. She answered on the first ring, and for once, I didn't waste time with preamble. "Mom, Emma's having some kind of cardiac episode. Ambulance is coming to the school. You need to get here now." "I'm on my way." No questions, no hesitation, just absolute focus. The line went dead. I called my father next, delivered the same message, got the same response. Then I sat with Emma, holding her hand, keeping her calm until the paramedics arrived. They worked with swift efficiency, asking questions I could answer because I'd learned emergency protocols in the club I joined to save myself. They stabilised her, loaded her onto a stretcher, and took her away with sirens that sounded like vindication. My parents arrived 7 minutes later, both of them frantic, both of them barely holding together. My mother grabbed my shoulders. "Where is she? Is she okay? What happened?" "She's on her way to County General. They think it might be a heart arrhythmia. She was conscious and stable when they left." My father was already running back to his car. My mother started to follow, then stopped and turned back to me. Her face was a mess of tears and terror and something else, something that looked like shame. "You called," she said. "You called right away. You handled it perfectly. You saved your sister." "Of course I did. It was an emergency." She stared at me for a long moment, and I watched her put the pieces together. The bus crash I'd never told her about because I'd lived it in another timeline. The electrical fire I'd handled alone. All the small moments over the past months when I'd stopped reaching out, stopped demanding, stopped calling for help with things that weren't really emergencies. "The bus," she said slowly. "That day, 3 months ago, when you reported the mechanical issue. That wasn't just vigilance, was it? Something happened. Something you never told us about." I could have lied. Instead, I just looked at her steadily and said, "I learned to tell the difference between wanting attention and needing help. Emma needed help today. I made sure she got it." My mother's face crumpled. "Helena, you should go. Emma needs you now. Really needs you. Not the way I used to need you, which was just noise." She left, but I could see the weight of understanding settling on her shoulders like snow. Emma was fine. The doctors confirmed it was a panic-induced arrhythmia triggered by stress and caffeine, and the pressure of being perfect all the time. They kept her overnight for observation, and my parents stayed with her, and I went home alone to the quiet house and felt nothing but relief that I'd been there, that I'd known what to do, that I'd saved my voice for a moment that mattered. David came over that evening without calling first. He found me in the backyard, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. "I heard about Emma," he said. "You were amazing today." I made a phone call and held her hand. The paramedics were amazing. He sat down beside me on the grass, close but not touching. "I've been thinking about us, about how I used to complain that you were too needy, too clingy. And then you changed, and I thought it was because you'd matured, but really, you just stopped trusting me to show up." I didn't argue. There was no point. "The thing is," he continued, his voice rough, "I miss it. I miss you needing me. I miss feeling important to you. And I know that's selfish, but it's true." I turned to look at him then, really look at him. He was handsome in the golden light, sincere in his confusion, and completely unaware that what he missed wasn't me. It was the feeling of being needed without having to actually show up. "You're right," I said softly. "That is selfish. Because you don't miss me needing you. You miss me making you feel needed without you having to earn it." His face went through several expressions before settling on something like resignation. "So this is it? We're done?" "We were done 3 months ago, You just didn't notice because I stopped making noise about it." He left quietly, no drama, no fight. Just the soft click of the back gate closing and the sound of his car pulling away. I watched the sunset deepen, feeling lighter than I had in either of my lives. My parents came home late that night with Emma between them, wrapped in blankets and looking fragile in a way she never had before. My mother made tea while my father fussed over pillows and my sister settled onto the couch with grateful exhaustion. I brought down my own blanket and sat in the chair across from her, and for a while we were just quiet together. "Thank you," Emma said finally, "for today, for knowing what to do, for not freezing or panicking or making it worse. You would have done the same for me." She smiled, but it was sad. Would I have? I'm not sure I would have stayed as calm as you did. I think I would have fallen apart. You would have figured it out. People do when they have to. My mother appeared with tea, distributing cups with shaking hands. She sat beside Emma on the couch, and my father took the other chair, and we all sat there in the dim lamplight like people who'd survived something together. "I need to tell you something," my mother said, looking at me. Something I should have said months ago but didn't know how. I waited, cup warm between my hands. "That day, you reported the bus issue. I'd been about to answer a call from you when I saw it was during Emma's rehearsal, and I sent it to voicemail because I assumed you were calling about something that could wait. I do that a lot. I did that a lot, because you called so often that I started to assume nothing you called about was really urgent." The confession sat heavy in the air. And then, when I saw the report about the bus, about how close it had been to a real accident, I thought about what if you'd been trying to call me that day? What if you'd needed me and I hadn't answered because I trained myself not to? What if my daughter had died because I was tired of her needing me? "Mum, no, let me finish. You changed yourself because we failed you. You learned to stop asking for help because we taught you that asking was annoying. And today, when Emma really needed you, you knew exactly what to do because you'd learned to save yourself. And I'm so grateful, but I'm also so sorry. So deeply, terribly sorry." My father cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm sorry too, for every meeting I put first, every time I told you that you were being dramatic, every moment I made you feel like needing me was a burden. You were my daughter, and I treated your needs like interruptions, instead of like what they were, a child asking for her father to care." I looked at them both. These people I'd loved so desperately in my first life that I'd suffocated them with need, and then loved so carefully in my second life that I'd almost disappeared. And I realised the truth wasn't in either extreme. The truth was somewhere in the middle, in the space between desperate dependency and cold independence. "I called too much before," I said slowly. "I made everything an emergency because I needed constant proof that I mattered. And you're right that it was exhausting. I can see that now from this side of it. But when I really needed you, when it was actually life or death, you'd learn not to listen. So I learned not to call, and that wasn't fair to either of us, because it meant I stopped trusting you with anything real." "And we lost you," my mother whispered. "Not literally, but we lost you anyway. We lost the right to know what's happening in your life, to be there for the big moments, to matter to you the way parents should matter." "No," I said, "you didn't lose me. You just found a different version of me. One who knows the difference between wanting attention and needing help. One who can save herself when she needs to, but still knows how to ask for help when it matters. And maybe that version is better. Maybe we all needed to break a little to rebuild something stronger." Emma reached over and took my hand. "Teach me," she said, "how to do that. How to ask for help before I'm having a heart attack in the library. Because I think I'm the opposite of what you were. I never ask for anything until I'm literally dying. and that's not healthy either. I squeezed her fingers and smiled. I think we could both stand to meet in the middle. My father leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. So what do we do now? How do we fix this? We practice, I said. We practice calling and answering. We practice asking and giving. We practice trusting each other again, one small moment at a time. And we accept that it's going to be awkward and uncomfortable, and sometimes we're going to get it wrong, but we keep trying anyway. Starting when? My mother asked. Starting now, I said. Starting with this. I need you all to know that I'm scared sometimes, that being strong all the time is exhausting, that I don't actually have everything figured out, even though I've gotten good at pretending I do. And I need to know that if I call you, really call you for something that matters, you'll answer. Not because you have to, but because you want to. We will, my father said, and his voice was firm. We promise you, Helena, we will answer. And I promise, I said, to only call when it really matters, to respect your time and your lives and your right to not be on call for every little thing I'm feeling, to be the daughter who knows the difference. We sat there in the lamplight, the four of us, and made promises we hoped we could keep. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It wasn't a complete healing of everything that had broken, but it was a beginning, and that was enough. The weeks that followed were different, easier in some ways, harder in others. My mother started checking in with me deliberately, scheduled calls that felt like care rather than obligation. My father took me to coffee once a week. No phones allowed, just conversation. Emma and I studied together, and sometimes she told me when she was stressed, and sometimes I told her when I needed space. And both of us learned that asking and answering were skills that required practice. David tried to reach out a few times, messages that trailed off into silence when I didn't respond with the eagerness he remembered. Eventually, he stopped trying. I heard later that he'd started dating a girl named Melissa who called him constantly, who needed him for everything, who made him feel important in all the ways I no longer did. I hoped she was less exhausting than I'd been, and I hoped he'd learn to answer when it mattered. But mostly, I just stopped thinking about him at all. On the anniversary of the day I died in my first life, I went to the place where the bus would have crashed. The guardrail had been replaced since then, new, shiny, stronger. I stood at the edge of the mountain road and looked down at the ravine below, and I felt nothing but grateful distance. I'd spent my first life screaming into a void and expecting it to love me back. I'd spent the beginning of my second life building walls so high that no one could disappoint me. But somewhere in the middle, I'd found something better. The ability to need people without needing them to complete me, to ask for help without making it a test of love, to save my voice for emergencies, and trust that when I used it, people would listen. The wind blew cold across the mountain, and I turned away from the ravine and walked back to my car. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother. Dinner tonight? Your choice, where we go? And, Helena? Thank you for calling yesterday just to talk. It meant more than you know. I smiled and typed back. Sounds perfect. I'll meet you at 6. It was that simple. I asked. She answered. Neither of us had to die first to learn how. I drove home through streets painted gold with sunset, past the school where Emma had almost died, and I'd learned what real emergencies looked like. Past David's house, where someone else's voice was probably filling the spaces I'd left empty. And I felt nothing but peace. The quiet kind that comes from knowing your worth isn't measured in how much people sacrifice for you, but in how well you can stand on your own and still choose to reach out. The girl who died on a bus because no one answered her call was gone. But the woman who saved her sister by knowing when to speak had learned something better than revenge. She'd learned that the most powerful thing you can do is stop asking people to prove they love you and start showing them what love looks like. I pulled into my driveway as the last light faded from the sky. Inside, the house was warm and lit and waiting. My father's car was already there. He'd left work early to be home for dinner. Through the window, I could see Emma setting the table and my mother in the kitchen, and all the small rituals of a family learning to be better. I sat in my car for one more moment, letting the silence settle. In my first life, this silence had felt like abandonment. In my second life, it had felt like armor. Now, it just felt like peace. I turned off the engine and went inside, into the warmth and the light and the messy, imperfect work of loving people who'd failed me and learning to let them try again. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and somewhere in the kitchen, my mother was laughing, and Emma was telling a story, and my father was asking me how my day had been. And when he asked, I told him. Not everything, not the weight of 2 lifetimes and the memory of dying alone, but enough to let him in, enough to practice trusting that this time if I called, he would answer. That was enough.